Hey, what's going on? Welcome to another episode of AngularAir. I am your host, Justin, and on today's episode, we are going to be talking about leveling up your NGRX skills with apparently 10 time-tested best practices. We'll see if we get through all 10 or not, but we'll discuss things. It'll be pretty awesome. We'll say hi to our panelists, and then we'll meet our guest, a returning guest, so it'll be pretty exciting, and then we'll dive into the content. Joining us today, we have Alyssa. Alyssa, how's it going?
So happy to be here, and I'm pumped for all 10. So if we don't get to all 10, you might see the angry fans. Eight's fine. Eight's fine.
There might be an accompanying article out there that has the information as well.
Oh, that can
don't get to it all. Maybe,
okay.
There we go.
We may at least mention like all of them, like at least with one sentence, but yeah, we'll see.
There we go.
I have to cover my loose ends with the Alyssa, right? So it's like,
yep. Mike's joining us. Mike, what's going on?
Not too much. Got my notepad ready. I'm gonna take some notes. We'll learn a bit today.
Nice. Every time I see your background, I want to put your background as my background, like we did that one day. So I might have to do that.
Okay, you can come visit anytime. You can get an actual picture of the background.
All right, that'd be awesome. All right, Tomas, how's it going?
Thank you. Very good. Very happy to be here again, as you said, like a returning guest. But yeah, it's always exciting to meet all of you guys and like chit chat and get deep with these topics. So yeah, looking forward.
Awesome. Now, just the one other episode you were on with us? I can't remember. I think it was just one, but maybe more?
I think two. There was something like with the Angular architecture and then maybe something else. But as we discussed previously, like AngularAir has been on for quite some time. So it's kind of hard to keep track of all these cool things which you already published. But yeah.
Right. This is true. Yeah. Before we started, we were talking about what was the start date. And it was like November of 2014 that AngularAir started. And we've been pretty consistent.
Crazy. That means in 24 we have to do like a big 10-year celebration. Yeah.
That's some serious things.
That's like 2 years from now. A year and a half.
Yeah, it will be so fun.
We're still going to be going. All right. Everybody on the hook.
Like a celebration episode, like with the party and everything. Yeah.
Yes. Oh my gosh. If we can like find a streaming service that can handle it, try to invite every guest that's ever been on in the last 10 years.
Oh my God.
Wow, that would be that is an amazing idea right there. Wow.
Everybody gets 1 second to smile.
Is it possible with OBS? Do we know if this technology exists? We're gonna find out. That would be amazing. Anyways.
Right. Wow, that'd be crazy.
I'm busy that day.
You're busy.
That's because Mike doesn't want to be responsible for building the OBS setup, but we all know he'll do it because he loves us and he loves you, Angular community.
No, I'm doing it for everybody else because I tend to bring chaos versus eliminate chaos. So I don't want to incite any riots or anything.
There we go.
I am so excited about these tips. I'm so pumped.
Yeah.
Seriously. You got to start with the most juiciest, though. Did you put the most juiciest on number 1, or did you save it till the end?
Did you just say?
I think we start very strong today. I think we start very
strong.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Tomas, do you want to start by maybe telling our viewers a little about yourself, what you got going on? That sort of thing?
Yeah. But if we do the juiciest first, that means people are going to stay for like the first 5 minutes and then be like, I know what I need to know. I'm out. So
we'll find ways to keep them here.
But
we're going to do the top 10 NGRX tips, and you have to stick around for number 10.
Okay,
I got you.
Time, I have it written down. We can flip it up. Actually, it's not a big deal. Like I have to get the tips from Mike, like the marketing tips, like
marketing tips
for the end. Marketing tips with broker, like next podcast. Like
number 6 will blow your mind. That's what you got to lead with, right?
There you go. They keep him in suspense.
So anyway, maybe like a quick introduction. So hey folks, my name is Tomas. Online I am under the name Tomas Trajan. I am a Google developer expert for Angular and web technologies. I am currently working mostly as a contractor in Switzerland with various enterprise organizations, and also starting slowly like to spread like to like a global reach, like depending on who is interested, right? And from this year, basically, we started like our own company with another fellow Google developer expert from Switzerland called Kevin Kreutzer. So we have this thing called Angular Experts where we offer our services. So, and in the community, I'm most active like with writing of the articles. That's also like why we are here now today, because I wrote yet another article. So that's kind of like my jam. But besides that, I also like to speak at meetups and conferences. I'm also a co-organizer of the Angular Meetup Zurich with some other fellow cool folks. Unfortunately, we were a bit put on hold because of like the recent pandemics and this kind of stuff, but we hope to restart with like in-person events later this year. So if you are like from Switzerland or from like around in the region, then feel free, drop by. We'll have some cool content, meet some cool people, network, and learn some stuff. So it's always nice. Yeah. And basically that's kind of it. And one thing which is also related to the topic of today, which is kind of was like one of the two major sources of like the know-how which was in that article, is that last 2 years I spent creating and developing a product called Omniboard, which is basically a software as a service solution which helps you understand and evolve your polyrepo enterprise code bases. So if you have like hundreds of projects and you want to track who is using which version, who is using deprecated APIs, track some migration and stuff like that. So this all can do it for you. And that was one of the two main like sources of the inspiration for this topic and for the article, because if you are a solo developer creating such a thing, you really have to think about how to be as efficient as possible to get the features for your users, right? So you don't want to spend time like polishing like the setup and writing everything by hand, and like you want to choose the technologies which help you to get to the desired results as fast as possible. And that's why Angular, and that's why NGRX, and that's why those best practices for NGRX, because now it's kind of like proven that yeah, if you use this, you can get to great results. Another big source of inspiration was exactly that other part, which is the contracting with the enterprises. So if you have like a huge enterprise organization with tens of teams, hundreds of developers, and like no joke, like 180 Angular applications and 30 libraries, then again, you will get another perspective of how people use these things and what are like common pitfalls and like what is not so intuitive and what people get like very easily out of the box. And like because you communicate with all these people and you collect various feedbacks and you try to empower them and help them to get their job done like the best way possible. So those are like these main sources of inspiration for this article. That's why I said like time tested, real world proven.
Okay.
So I hope there is like some credibility to this kind of statement after this intro.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, let's start talking about them. So you want to? So we're talking about NGRX. So we maybe give like a recap of what NGRX is, what we're talking about here. Maybe
Makes
your
sense. No, definitely makes perfect sense, because of course, like there could be listeners who are just like starting their journey with like development of with Angular or frontend in general, right? So the thing is, the NGRX is a state management library, mostly focused on like Angular ecosystem. So if you think about it, if you use Angular, why do we use Angular in the first place, right? Why don't we just write like vanilla JavaScript or TypeScript and then basically update our HTML in like imperative way? Because it's error prone, because you will always do it a bit differently, and there is a lot of repetitive tasks. And that's why we have something like Angular, which allows us to write nice declarative components, services and stuff like that. So we are like on a higher level, right? Now, what about the state management? Whenever we have some front-end application, we usually get some state from somewhere, most likely from some backend, from some database, to show it to user. And then we let user change that state, and then we probably store it somewhere else, right? Now, Angular solves the rendering of the data in like a very standardized, nice, structured, repetitive way, but it's not so opinionated with regards of how to manage state. So it's like you can manage state in Angular in many different ways. You can just have it in your components, you can extract it into the services. But if we apply that logic, right, so we use Angular because we don't want to do rendering always a bit differently, then that's exactly the reason why we would want to use like a dedicated state management library called like something like NGRX, for example, so that we manage our state always in the same way. So it's kind of, at least that's how I think about it. This is how I understand it, that's like one of the biggest benefits of using dedicated state management solution, even in stuff like Angular, which is already pretty high level out of the box, so that we always do it in the same predictable way. And because it's always the same, then there will be quite some other helpful things like in terms of automation and generation of codes and pattern, which we'll also then discuss, and will be actually our first point. So probably that was like a very nice thing. So, but yeah, still with the NGRX, like maybe like some vocabulary for people who are not so well versed with that. So that they know what we are speaking about when we have like a point about like the selectors and actions. So maybe like a very quick recap about that. So this state management library, NGRX, basically implements a one-way data flow that started with Flux, then was implemented as a Redux.js, which is like a reusable state management library implementing that pattern, mostly used, I think, by React, but also in the past by AngularJS. And now NGRX is like this implementation of Flux/Redux pattern for the Angular. So it has like APIs which work very well with the Angular, so it's very easy to integrate. Now, what does it mean? Basically, the key idea of that kind of approach to state management is to extract all the state into a single place called state store, which serves as a single source of truth, right? So there are big benefits to that approach, because imagine if you have state in 5 services and then parts of that state is duplicated, then what that means is you would have to write a synchronization logic, and it's so easy to not do it properly and to forget some parts, and then you end up in inconsistent state. You'll end up with hard to reproduce bugs. So this is solved by having a single source of truth. This is the store. This is like the heart of the NGRX, where you store all your data. And then you need to retrieve the data to show it in your components, right? So for that, you can write NGRX selectors. And those selectors, they allow you to retrieve like the subset of that state from the store to put in, display it in a component. But even better, the selectors allow you to basically build derived state, so that you don't have any kind of state duplication in your store. So like a very iconic example of that is when you have like a list of orders, and you want to know like the total order value, and every order has like an amount on it. And then instead of having this total in your store, which is kind of derived state, so you would still have to synchronize it manually, you can just derive the total by adding up all the orders in your selector. So we have a store, and we go like here, we have a selector to give the state to a component, and then that's basically half of the problem. So that's another big benefit of NGRX. You can basically split the implementation of your applications in 2 halves. Given state A, did we render the proper view A, right? So that's amazing. And now the second half is to change that state. So then we have to handle user interaction, and this is done with actions. So whenever user does anything, we will basically dispatch an action. It's kind of like an event which describes what user did. So for example, user updated the orders, hit the save button. Now we want to update it in a store, right? So the action is this kind of like an intent, like an event, what happened. And then we go to thing called reducer, which basically processes that action to update the state in the store. And now we have this loop. So this is pretty amazing. And that would be kind of enough if we didn't have, if we had like a front end only, if we had like some game or something where you don't really persist data, or you only store it in the browser, that would be kind of enough. But of course, if we in the real life, we usually have some state in the backend in the database. So we have to make a request to load it and the request to store it back, right? And for that is this last part of NGRX, which is called effects, which is to perform side effects. So one of the most typical use cases is to basically load data, persist data, but it can be anything like from navigating somewhere to reflecting the state into URL to enable deep linking and stuff like that. So those are the building blocks of NGRX. So I think like as a primer, of course, it's a huge topic on its own. So if you never heard about it, it can be a bit overwhelming, but for the people who know, then they will know. And now we can dig deeper into the best practices, I guess.
Nice. One of the things that we've talked about on here before, panelists and I, the concept of kind of thinking about it like a front-end database, right? And you have this, like, it's what we're doing is we're loading that database up with some data and we're keeping it on the front end. We have a way to select data from that, the selectors. We have a way to add data to the data record, right? Which is those actions and reducers and things like that. And so, yeah, it's kind of like that's what we're dealing with here is the solution of that in the client side, JavaScript memory code.
Yeah. One additive to that I like to think about is that when you think of a selector, it's easy to think of it as just a query, but being that they are replayable and contain specific logic, I like to think of them as a view, which is basically this predetermined query that you run that automatically performs, well, not automatically, that performs some sort of logic to be able to get the values that you want, whether or not you're summing based off of something you're selecting. God, SQL comes back to me so easily. I haven't done SQL in like 10 years. And just thinking about it, it pops. It's just like, hey, it reappear that logic, that memory. But that conceptually, that's how I like to think of a selector. I actually dispatched 2 actions already on the show. I removed and added Alyssa to the show.
Remove and add her video. Nice.
But Mike, you know what? You already guessed like one of the best practices, actually.
I did?
You already guessed what it's like. Where was it?
That's your marketing. You're kind of another teaser.
It's not the number 7, it's number 4, but you guessed it.
Nice.
Oh.
But yeah.
All right, so what's number 1?
Yeah, before we just jump there, one more thing. Like I really like that that metaphor which you used, that it's like a front-end database. And I wanted just to add a small thing to that what I heard is like it's like a front-end cache or subset of cache of like the backend database. So that's kind of like building on top of that. I think that's a very great metaphor, the way to think about it. Cool. So the first one is use schematics to generate whole NGRX state features. So let's unpack that. So first of all, what are the schematics, right? So because I've seen so many people in practice who still do not use schematics when they write Angular applications, which I think it's a bit sad, but let's change that for the listeners here. So basically, schematics are a part of Angular CLI, which allows you to generate code, right? So you can generate components, modules, services, or even like a whole lazy loaded module, which will be out of the box integrated into the routing correctly with like initial container component and stuff like that, right? So there are like great benefits to doing it like this, because if you use schematics, then you can be guaranteed that every feature will look exactly the same, right? You first like generate your lazy module, then you generate some components in and stuff like that. So, and because this is such a powerful thing, then NGRX team made also sure that their library comes with the schematics, which allows you to generate the NGRX things, right? So with NGRX, you can also generate like individual things, like you can just generate a selector, you can just generate a reducer, store, or actions. But what is usually better way of doing it is to generate the whole state feature. So in NGRX, that schematic is called literally the feature. And then the workflow can be like this. So you are working on an application, you have some navigation, and then you have a feature A, right? And you generated your lazy feature A with the Angular CLI schematic. So ng generate module minus route, the URL will be A for feature A, just for example, right? And this will generate you a feature, for example, in a folder called like /feature/A, and that's your A feature. And now you want to use a NGRX based state management for that feature. So you can run another command, which is like ng generate. And then if you, well, let's just make it a long version, and then we say how you can make a shorter version. So basically you would have to say the name of the library. So it's like at NGRX/schematics. and then the column, double point. That's always confusing for me as a non-native English speaker. Like, I think it's called column. And then you provide the name of the schematic, which is the feature. It's literally called the feature. And then you can provide, again, that path. So like features /a, and then, for example, /state, and then the name of the state, let's just say it's let's not call it A, let's call it like user admin or something. And then we want to manage the user state. So we do like /state/user. And then we can also provide a couple of flags. So the most common ones are -a and -c. This will already create you actions for loading out of the box, and it will use the new creator syntax, which is basically less verbose as compared to older class-based syntax. And then the last argument would be to provide the module where you want to integrate it, which will point to that /feature/user module. And you run these two commands, and basically you have the whole scaffold ready out of the box, everything perfectly integrated. And again, could you write those files by hand? Of course you could, but like, why should you, right? So I could not write like the reducer setup by heart like right now, because I always generated it, right? And then like the big benefit of generating it is that it will always be done in exactly the same way, right? So then whenever you go from, it will not be slightly different import, slightly different naming. So then when you also want to like search and replace stuff, or if you want to migrate to newer syntax, then maybe even like they provide like automatic migration because you follow the patterns and stuff like that, right? So with this kind of approach, you basically can get the whole architecture of your application with all the features, with all the skeletons, with the lazy state, eager state, whatever you want, in a couple of minutes with just a couple of commands. So I think that's like really a big deal, especially if you are a solo developer who wants to get stuff up and running as fast as possible, right? So I think that, yeah,
one of the things you mentioned is like that consistency, right? And I think that plays very well in when you have bigger teams or more people working on that code base, right? At having that, it looks the same, it's formatted the same, right? Like that's a really big benefit from, looking at that code to people reviewing PRs and different PRs later down the road and things like that. So that's a huge plus.
100%.
One of the things I always struggle with is like, and I don't know if this is just because time of having developed for so long, but I'm still in a routine where like I have a hard time reminding myself to use the generators. Like I had a generator I just created the other day, and like 2 days ago I started writing that code by hand, and I'm going, I created the generator to help me do that, and I'm not using my own generator I created. And I don't know why I get in that, but I guess I just fall into a habit of going back to what I'm used to doing pre-generator time. And so now I'm like having to force myself to get more consistent at go to the generators first. Anybody else have that, or is it just me?
It's really interesting to hear, because like I'm just so lazy as a person. So okay, I can save like 80% time. Like I just hate to type for some reason. I'm like this keyboard dyslexia where I always make like typos or stuff like that. So the less I type, the happier I am. But hey, interesting.
I have to say that as of right now, that makes me sad to hear, because I miss generators. And normally, because I wrote a lot of them, and I use a lot of them, and I rely on them. But the current project that I'm working on for my client is not using the CLI, nor is it using NX. So I do not have the ability to run generators at this point. So I am manually typing or copy and pasting something else and deleting, and it makes me sad. So I do know how to write a selector, or excuse me, a reducer by hand, because I've been doing it for the last few months.
Right.
I think I must subconsciously do it like by hand, so that I can always still constantly be excited when I run the generator, because it's like magic. I mean, it's so I just have a good time every time I run it. I'm like, this is awesome. And yeah, maybe I'm just subconsciously saying you got to do it manually sometimes, so you keep that stoke alive of when you do run it. I don't know.
And there is another thing which I was not aware of. Like one colleague showed me, like I think a month ago, depending on your editor, like this one is for the IntelliJ IDEA, for example, but I think VS Code has something like this too, at least through extension, is that if I just right click the folder, I can run schematic directly in that folder, because that's like one part which is slightly annoying about the schematics is you have to provide the paths, right? So if you are doing like the sub feature, and then you do like slash feature a slash sub feature a slash sub feature a state slash user, then you're like, oh my god, like that's a bit too much, and it's very easy to make typo there or stuff like that, right?
If
But
if your terminal's current directory is in that directory and you run the generate, it'll put it there automatically.
But usually I'm at the root of the workspace in the terminal, so
same. And it, but I believe that, because I don't think that's possible through VS Code, because that's what I use.
The NX console, if you have the NX console extension, then it's wonderful, because when you run the generator through the UI, those commands where it says like project name, it'll auto complete that for you.
Oh wow, okay.
So that's pretty cool. Yeah,
I typically go to the terminal, but I believe VS Code will allow you to open a terminal to a directory. I think you can right click and say basically open terminal here.
So that's already solves this, definitely, yeah. And then in IDEA, there is a plugin where you just like right-click the folder and you can run any schematics which it finds like in your node module. So that's very practical too. But still, even in the terminal from the root, usually very well worth it and very possible. So do not think that if you don't do these advanced things that it's like not worth it, it's too much work. It's always worth it.
Going back is using the schematics to automatically generate these pieces. Is that tip 1?
Yes, and especially to focus, like to skip like the actions only, reducer only, but to always use the feature generator, which generates everything together, so it's also wired up together, everything, so like that the selector already is wired up with the reducer, and that the consumer module already is basically registering the store for that module and the effects for that module. So it's all just nicely wired up, which you would have to still do manually if you just generated one by one. And maybe one thing which we should also point out is that you get the tests out of the box, right? Like the test scaffolding and the test setup, and especially for the effects, this is very useful, because again, that's quite some like setup involved. So it's you are much more likely to write tests if it's just there waiting for you. Just please write the test. You don't have to do any kind of setup. So I think that's another huge benefits of like just using schematics to generate stuff. Yeah.
Nice. This is a good opening number 1, because I think then now you can also start thinking about, generators. Okay, so as we go through the rest of the rules, you can also start applying and saying, well, how can I make a generator to help fulfill those rules, consistency of using those rules, right?
Wait, maybe can I make a guess? Is writing tests one of the tips, or testability?
No.
Well, it's 11. We're up to 11. We're going to do 11 today.
Well, it's like a sub point of the number 2, but it's not like so direct, let's just say. Okay.
I'm excited about number 2. I've already seen it.
Yeah.
Cheater. You're a cheater.
I am.
Broco experiencing everything as it comes. Anyway, so let's go to number 2. So recognize and leverage the NGRX 80/20 rule. So that's basically, this point is like when I traveled back from future, where I already took like the Broco's course for the marketing, and I applied all the tips which he gave me. Anyway, so 80/20 NGRX rule. So yeah, this is a bit like clickbaity, but basically what this means is I was really surprised that I never really seen this mentioned too much online or in some articles or stuff like that. If you think about NGRX, it's Angular first, or 100% focused on Angular state management library solution. Everything is implemented basically with RxJS streams behind the scenes, right? So the selectors, they give you a stream of changes from the store, all this kind of stuff. But if you think about it, then 80% of the code you will write for NGRX is not aware of Angular and is not aware of RxJS streams. It's just plain and mostly pure functions. So I think that's really like a genius of the library design and the API design, where you use these powerful technologies, but you can hide them from the like developer in a way where developer can write the simplest possible code there is, right? What is simpler than a pure function? What is easier to understand? What is easier to test? What is fastest to test, right? So you don't have to start up your test bed with like a small Angular context, right? So, and only 20%, which are the effects, are the actual Angular services where there is a dependency injection, where there is usually you have to work with the RxJS streams, but those streams are then very tame because the NGRX manages the lifecycle of that stream for you. So you don't have to subscribe, you don't have to unsubscribe. There is a way to chunk it in a very small pieces where you can call them from each other, like with actions and stuff like that, right? So we will probably dive deeper on all of those. But the main point is that I think that's like not so well or publicly stated genius of the library, which I really find like this amazing, that you can basically hide all that complexity and only expose to the developer like the need to write plain functions. So I think that's really just amazing property, right? And then of course from there we can continue like what are the benefits for the developers, right? So the testability, as Rocco said, right? So what is easier to test? If I want to test a reducer, yeah, I mean, on philosophical level, there is no difference between a reducer and a function multiply a times b, right? It's exactly the same thing. It's like 2 times 2 is 4. And the reducer will be a bit more logic and some different shape of objects and stuff like that. But on the philosophical level, it's basically multiply or sum, 2 plus 2, right? So I think that's really, really amazing that it shows the power of the API design, that when you find like the correct level of abstraction and you structure it properly, then everybody can have a good time because they don't get all this crazy tangled code, which usually happens if you don't have structure, right? So that's, yeah.
That abstraction is one of the key pieces of NGRX, in my opinion, of you have this idea of, all right, I need to go load data, which means I need to take my parameters. I need to build a URL. I need to make an HTTP call. I need to wait for that to come back. I need to process the result. I need to handle the errors. But from a component using NGRX, all I need to basically say is go get that data. And then that's it. Go get that data based off of this ID. Super. Hey, yeah. And when you're done, I'm already listening to that because I have a selector. I have the ability to get that back. So basically, here, go do this, and then I'm going to be listening over here if you tell me what I need. It's like McDonald's, right? You go up to the counter and you say, I want a number 1 with cheese, right? I want my Big Mac meal. And then you just say, all right, go stand over there. And then when it's done, we don't have to care about how it's being cooked or anything else or whatever. Just come over here, and when it's done, you're going to get it. And so NGRX is the fast food of Angular applications. And with that, I'm done.
Sounds a bit unhealthy, but is the bio like properly done version of the fast food? Like it's good for you actually. Yeah.
Well, one of the things I find exciting about that is like when we talk about the upcoming Angular 14, right? And there's been some talk around this new inject function or the use of the inject function to be able to do dependency injection, but at a function level. I think that's going to open some doors to maybe even go further with this 80-20 and maybe drop it down closer to 100%, right? Of just a small thin layer of how to integrate it with Angular. Because when I think about this, in terms of NGRX and its Angular implementation, it's like to do those effects, to do those service calls, we need dependency injection, right? And we're leveraging Angular, which is using dependency injection to do that. So if we could abstract that, then now we have more pure things as part of that NGRX implementation that we can decouple from Angular and really be flexible. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, definitely. Though I think I was tweeting about this the other day that exactly like for the use cases like popular libraries like NGRX or some other ones, which already went such a long way in terms of like reducing the boilerplate and simplification, right? So these new APIs made available by Angular 14, maybe they can take it one step further, right? So, and it's also something which Broco started with. So basically when you use NGRX, your components can be shrinked to bare minimum, where you basically just retrieve the state with a selector and then dispatch actions, right? But now you still have to have a constructor when you inject the store, and then you define your streams. But maybe even that step can be reduced. And I mean, is it like really a game changing? No, but it's still a convenience, and we want to have as much convenience as we can, right? So this can get even better with this inject. Yeah. So then maybe because we will skip now one and go to the fourth one, because this is related to also what Brocco said. It's called basically create perfect view selector or view model for your container components. So this, I think, ties nicely to what we discussed and what Brocco mentioned. So that's another huge benefit of NGRX, that you can reduce the make it smaller, the implementation of your components. And as probably everybody who ever wrote some Angular code professionally knows, that the testing of the component is the most complicated and most painful. So of course, if you can have components which basically do not need to be tested because there is no logic, and that's kind of amazing, right? So what does that mean, and how does this relate to that point? So again, if we have a feature, right? Usually feature, it's like you navigate to some menu point, and then it's like a lazy loaded module with the container component which holds that feature. And then we usually need to retrieve the state from the store for that feature. Of course, depending on the site, if it's really huge, this can be then nested further down, but let's just say we have like a self-contained feature. And then we have to use selectors to retrieve the state from the store. So I've seen various approaches how to do that. Sometimes people define maybe 5-6 properties in their component where they basically store the selectors to select the users, and then select the roles, and then select whatever, right? So multiple things. But then they have to subscribe to all of them in their template, which leads to some nested ng container code where they start unwrapping all those streams, right? So it turns out that usually it is much better approach to create like a perfect dedicated view selector for that component, which delivers it the state in a perfect shape to render it in the template, right? Yes, please.
I have a question. So I fall into the habit of saying, all right, NGRX and my state is where I create some base selectors, like basically go give me all this stuff. But you're talking about the idea of something hyper focused on my particular view. Or I might be doing some sort of feature of like, hey, here's my big thing. Here's an order. But maybe I'm just looking like, all right, here's where we're editing like the billing address. So a distinct selector for that. I struggle between the idea of, all right, I can just map off of that. I know RxJS, I know that, but should I create a separate selector for that? And if I do, where do I create that? So do I create that selector directly there in that component? In which case, why am I creating a selector? Why am I not just doing a map function within there? I know there's benefits performance-wise, memoization, and what have you for doing that, but that's my question. Why not just do a map? And especially even if it's combining multiple selectors of, I need customer information, I need order information. How do I piece that together for my hyper-focused? I'm using all the right hand signals too. Hyper-focused selected data.
No, that's a really great question, actually. And that was also like how I came to that and like with colleagues and stuff. So what you said is you have selectors which are managing their particular parts of the store or the state slices, and that's, you will always have that. That's always the case, even if you use this other approach which then I described, right? So you have these like state slice specific selectors which manage these partial states. And then basically we are trying to figure out why we would want to create a dedicated selector which retrieves like a perfect view for a component, instead of basically combining them with just plain RxJS inside of that component, if I understand that correctly. Because we could we inject the store, right, and then we can do store.select selector A, B, C, D, and then we can like do combine latest and these kind of things. So I think this is tied to that previous point, which is this 80-20, right? So that we don't want to have logic in the component. So we want to write just the pure function because it's easiest to test. So when we do it in a component, it's already a stream, plus it's in a component. And to test the component, to instantiate the component, we have to spin up the test bed. And even if you do like custom element schema so that we don't provide anything, still the test bed, it takes a while to spin up, right? While if we have like a user component, and next to the component we will have a user component selector.ts, and we just write there this perfect dedicated selector, then all that logic will be just a plain function. So we can just test it as a plain function. We do not need to write any test for component in theory because there is no logic in that component, right? So I think that would be like the biggest benefit. And then another benefit, which is not really related to what you said, because you would get that benefit even with your approach, is that if you have a dedicated selector, you kind of decouple that component from the shape of the state in the store, because the component will always get the state from that selector, and that selector will not change. But if your store changes for some reason because the backend changed, then it's only one place where you have to fix it, right? So you can make those aliases or like those mappings over time. So I think you get like the best of three worlds. So like the component has no logic, so you don't have to really test it. The part which you test is a plain function. So if it's a plain function, you don't have to have any kind of test bed, so it's faster. It's always will be faster than starting like a mini Angular with the test bed, even if your context is extremely small. And you decouple your component from the shape of the state in your store. So as it evolves, because it will evolve, because the backends will evolve and the world will evolve, you only have to fix it in that one place, but the component implementation can stay the same forever, kind of, until the view changes, right? So I think it's like a best of three worlds.
So then my follow-up question, where do I put that component-specific selector?
Yes.
In Justin's hand. He's volunteering to hold on to all those for me.
I've been so quiet. I've been like dying. I'm so excited.
Right.
That's where you start thinking about you have your feature, which is your feature lib, which is these components, right? And you have another lib that's the facade for your feature, right? And so that's another, like just a lib, state lib, or whatever, that's a facade for your feature that feeds it these selectors for the view models. And then that lib or that layer is the one that talks to your NGRX features and aggregates that all together to figure out how to sculpt it to support the UI layer, right? So now you have this home for where you can write all these selectors that we're talking about that map down the data specifically for that one experience. And it's kept out of the components. And then you can fully change that stuff. You can add other business logic requirements to fulfill that view and all that stuff.
Yeah, that would be definitely possible and maybe very beneficial depending on the use case. Usually what we did was, like, if you have like a component, right, we had like external templates and styles. So I have my component TS, les, spec TS, HTML, and then I would have my component minus, or like my component selector.ts or something like next to it. So that's also a possibility, because we didn't really came up like with like full-blown facades, but that could be then maybe like a next evolutionary step. But like currently we were like very happy just with the approach where if like if there is a container component, it has its own dedicated selector next to it. We did not yet abstract away the actions, because then in the component, whenever user interacts, for example, clicks, we have a handler, and that handler is really trivial because it's just this store dispatch this action with this payload. And that's maybe something which could be also extracted to facade, but there is not really an implementation compared to that dedicated view selector where there is an actual implementation. This is why we have the dedicated view selector, and that's why we don't have a facade for actions for the time being. This might change in the future, but this is definitely something which can be and hopefully will be officially simplified with that inject functionality of Angular 14. So maybe then in the handler we can just call like well, probably we'll still have to like store the actions because it's constructor time, whatever, but probably can be further simplified. But yeah. But I hope you like that one, because I think this really, like, those three benefits are really huge, and it does make a difference. Like, as your application grows, that you don't have to care about these things. It really, I have to say, it does make a difference.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Oh, right. So what about another one? That's another one which is, I think I didn't see it too much, so that can be interesting for the folks. And it has also more like a poetic name, like when in doubt, pull your logic one level up to preserve nice, clean one-way dependency graph. So maybe let's talk about that one a little bit. So we already said that with NGRX, we can generate the whole state feature. That means like the reducer, action, selector effects, right, with a single command. And usually we will generate this for a specific lazy feature. But the cool thing is that NGRX doesn't really care if that state feature is lazy or eager. There is no notion of that in the NGRX. So what does often happen in practice is that you have a couple of lazy features which are like siblings, and they start with like isolated state. But then you realize, oh, actually, I need to reuse that part of the state between two sibling features, right? So this can happen like you have some, I don't know, users, and then you realize, oh, I need to user state also in the dashboard because I want to show to whom this task is belonging, right? So I want to reuse that user state. So, and because those features are lazy, you are not supposed to do like a direct sibling imports because there are some, you will break like the code splitting of the bundles, and you can even run into the runtime errors when it's like a different order of loading of your features and stuff like that. So basically what you need to do is you have to pull your state, or at least part of the state, one level up into your core, which is then available for the whole application, right? And this is kind of fractal. So if you have a multiple nested lazy features, so if you have like a feature A and then it has a sub feature A and then sub feature A, and if they have siblings, it's always just like one level up, right? So if I have sub A and sub B and they need to reuse some state, then it's just sub A, so like one level up. And there also in practice could be like two different situations. Sometimes you can pull the whole thing, but sometimes you will realize that part of that state implementation really belonged to that particular place where it was. So in that case, you can rerun those schematics again to generate kind of like the copy of that state, let's say in a core. And then you split that state. Basically, you just take part of the reducer, which was in the feature, and you take it into the core. So for example, you will manage the collection of users in a core so everybody can see it, but then some specifics about the filtering will still be in that lazy feature. And this is also something which NGRX makes very easy compared to like ad hoc logic. If I wanted to do this with like some ad hoc state managed by services, which is always done a bit differently, it can be very hard to untangle this, to split it, to make it available for multiple independent lazy features, which are siblings, right? So I think that's like a huge benefit of using that approach and that architecture again, compared to like not using it. Any thoughts on that?
I like that. The idea of just, hey, bubbling up or moving up just the pieces that you need to. But on a lot of applications, I feel like even some of the feature state can just be done at the root level. A lot of applications like, all right, look, we can just put all the store stuff here. It's not a boatload of logic. Again, it's just classes. There's not a lot of external dependencies. We're already bringing in the NGRX bits, right? What's an action? What's an effect? What's a reducer? All those pieces that drive that logic is already there. And you're adding, I don't know, a dozen functions. You're not adding a whole lot of additional bits to your bundle at the root level that if in most applications, I'm not telling people not to optimize, not to do things that make sense, but it's not going to be the worst thing in the world, in my opinion, for most applications, for all of the NGRX logic to live right at the root of the application.
I have to agree with that. In terms of like optimization, the like benefits are not so pronounced. That's 100% true. One thing which I think is there even more important is like that if you start in your lazy feature, then you are forcing some isolation. So you will not start to tangle up those bits, or it will be more painful to tangle them up. Like that, like you heavily reuse actions and heavily reuse selectors and heavily reuse whatever it is, delta reuse, I don't know. Like not really effects, but effects could trigger one another, right, through the actions and stuff like that. So you can make like the starting point is like full isolation. So whenever things are isolated, they are much easier to understand, because you know that if I have even 100 lazy features, if I make changes to this one, I could not have influenced anybody else. So I see that's basically for me like the main reason why to do like lazy loading in the first place. Of course, performance, of course, but like from the developer point of view, like just that I start as fully isolated. So I know like if I change this, I could not have broken other feature, even if I don't have perfect test coverage, for example. So that could be like a counter argument to that. But yes, it's like from the performance that like the bundle size, it would not be the craziest impact because there are no templates. I mean, the selector logic can get beat out of hand, but it's still nothing compared to the templates, right? But this isolation is something which starts paying dividends the longer you develop application, where it evolves again and like requirement changes, and then you make those changes, and then sometimes you don't have perfect test coverage, and it's very hard to understand the full impact of the change if everything is in the core. There is like no way of knowing that without checking the whole thing, right? So I think that's like a huge benefit, like with which then of course it's more pronounced the longer the application lives, because in the beginning, of course, you will be faster if everything is just in core. But if you get this isolation, if you isolate as many things as possible, then like later down the road, it will be much more maintainable and easier to predict what this change will require and what is the impact of this change. So again, it's never like a perfect solution. Like it's always a trade-off, right, in engineering. And you are paying for that with like more initial setup and more thinking, but then you may get benefits in the future.
I like to always say that development is like putting queen size sheets on a king size bed. Like you get one side all nice and it's nice, but you still, it doesn't fit on the other side. And you're just constantly trade-offs, right? It's trade-offs.
It's impossible to get the optimal, right?
Yeah. Right. So one of the things that I think about when I partition that state and think about this in this sort of topic, and I think like the concept of saying, hey, I have these view model selectors, and then my actual selectors that hit the feature helps to lead us down to these type of solutions where we start thinking about what is the data that's kind of shared. And then what is the data that what I call is transactional? So whatever the experience is that you're doing for that feature, that's the transactional data, like something, a selected order, right? The order ID for the selected order, that's for that experience. The orders themselves are part of some shared, feature data or state data, right? And so now you say, maybe I store the orders in this plot that can be used across features. And then I store like the selected ID as part of this particular features state, and now I aggregate those together and start composing it together. And like you said, then you just, as you go along, you start specific, and then you just elevate out to spots as needed up the tree until you're at a point where enough people can use it or enough places. Yeah.
And I like the point also that as you are escalating or moving something up a level, don't basically assume that you need to move all of it up, that you can take parts of it and still modify that feature state elsewhere.
100%, because if we just moved everything, then like we would lose that isolation. So like I had like exactly this kind of case when in that my product I defined some checks, and then I realized I need this check state like everywhere, just the base state. But then of course like the check filters and sorting and whatever else, check editor state, this should not belong to core. Like core is not interested in that. It's only in that feature where are all these components which use that state. So then you kind of split it in two. So you have like a core check state and the feature check state, and the core only maintains like the state of the collection from the backend, knows how to save it, knows how to load it, makes it available for every other feature. But then the feature one has a lot of, it's more like focused on the UI interactions, right? But it's still like about the checks. But yeah, that's definitely like one of the key points of that. Yeah.
Nice. All right, we're getting close to the top of the hour. We probably have enough time for one shorter one if we want to squeeze one more in.
I just say them like out loud, and then you can pick and we focus on that one, and then we wrap it up. So folks, like if you use NGRX, always use a router store and its selectors to access router state instead of like doing it by hand, integrating like Angular activated route with your NGRX logic. There is a library for that. It will play extremely nicely together. You get selectors for router state. It's amazing when you need to retrieve some state from the URL. Then of course, like the evergreen, always implement and name your actions as events compared to commands. So actions belong to where they started, where they were dispatched, where they were emitted, not to where to the destination where they will be processed. That way you will see basically what is happening in your application in that action history log. So it will be much easier to understand what's going on. So that's like easy to implement. Then one is actually related to what we already discussed. Embrace local selectors and actions specific to given component, container, and stuff like that, right? So we said like it's totally fine to write a perfect view selector next to your component. It's also okay to write actions which only belong to that component next to that component if that component is not part of some like well-cut state slice feature, right? So you can still write dedicated actions file next to it, right? Use effects only for orchestration. Make sure that the actual logic is in services instead of the effect. So to keep those effects clean. So it's like, let's just say if you have an effect, you have some transaction, right? First you do this, then you update that, and then you delete something else, right? Don't implement those things in that effect. Effect will just inject the services which perform this, and effect will just orchestrate. Effects can be triggered by any RxJS stream, can be very beneficial if you have some periodic processing and stuff like that. So it doesn't need to be just like you always dispatch an action, right? It can be a stream of scroll events, for example. And when you scroll to the bottom of the page, then you dispatch an action to load further data. Stuff like that can be done very nicely with the effects. And the last one is get comfortable with Redux DevTools and learn how to prevent potential performance issues as your application state grows with custom action sanitizer and state sanitizer. So now you can pick. If you remember, it was quite some and it was quite fast.
I think like you did quick summaries of each one. I think that's great. Like, I don't think that we need to dive into a specific one. We just got a bonus description of all of them. So that was awesome. And then we could just
drive
people to the article.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I think like it was good that we discussed those main ones, because those are the ones which I haven't seen discussed too much online compared to like some well-targeted, like use router store. Of course, you can find a lot of articles about that, but those more like philosophical, higher-level ones with the architecture is not so easy to convey. So I think we did a good job there, like with the focus. Yeah,
for sure.
We're focusing a lot on the positive. I need to focus on the negative.
Oh no, you're out of time, Mike. You're out of time. That's another episode.
Yeah, that's the problem. For me, it's Friday, almost 1:00. I now have a lot of things I want to go fix in my application, but it's Friday in the afternoon, and and it's a holiday weekend for me, and I'm not gonna get to start implementing these things on Tuesday, and it's gonna sit in my brain. I'm gonna be like, all right, I need to get rid of those combined latest that I added and create local selectors for that. I need to go and I need to implement a router store.
Well, you don't need to, right? But it maybe can be beneficial in the future.
I kind of do.
Step by step. It's never too late.
Make yourself a reminder to watch this episode again on Tuesday morning before you start. Just cue this episode up.
That's smart. All right, we're good. I loved all of it.
Good?
I'm going to forget it for now, but I'm going to go rewatch on Tuesday.
Do we have time to answer May's question? Maybe? No?
Sure.
Possibly?
You can answer it, Alyssa. Go ahead.
Dude,
I haven't.
I'm not the NGRX girl. That's not me.
Oh no.
What's wrong? So he said, assume you have a dummy component and you want to update the dummy component state. Do you propagate the state update to the parent container who has access to the store and then set the updated state of the dummy component through some input property?
Can I handle that?
Please.
So you have a dummy component. Your words, not mine. But it's a component that is
presentational component. Can we call it
presentation component? That basically, hey, you don't have any responsibilities to do anything except for yourself, right? That makes you like kind of a watchdog. That something happened, and all you need to be like, ooh, something happened. I'm just going to tell you, mom and dad, my parent, and say, hey, something happened, so go do something about that, right? Hey, there's somebody snooping outside the house. Go do something. And then the parent can take that and say, oh, yeah, that's bad. I need to go and have something happen. I need to go tell the store, hey, this happened. And you don't necessarily have to dispatch it from there. You can basically tell it's your parent, hey, something happened, go do something about it. And this way that gives you the reusability at the dummy component level or the presentation component level, but staying completely anonymous from the idea of the store, and allow that to flow through the store or be through the consumer of that presentation component.
Yeah, you have those decision-making components up higher that they're the ones that interact with the view model, interact with the actions, and then they just simply flow the data down or listen for an output, inputs and outputs from those presentational components.
Mommy and daddy components. Thank you.
I would like to extend to that, like that model, which is like you have containers, you have a view presentation components, and it's really good if they are not aware of the store, but sometimes you have like uncle component. So if like a user's feature, right? And then like there is a user's editor, for example, it's not really reusable. It will be only there is just to like chunk the code and wrap stuff up. Then in those cases, I am in favor of like, it's okay to dispatch action, but I rather receive the data through inputs. So there's like an extension of that family model. So we have mommy, we have a child, but sometimes there is an uncle. An uncle maybe dispatches some action. That's okay.
Absolutely.
I mean, that's a good name. I've been trying to think about, like, I call them like widget components, where they're like, they may have some interaction. They don't live in a feature because I want to reuse them across features, but I want to couple, like store interaction with them because I want them to come contained as like a widget ready to go, right?
Yeah, we should have you coin widget component and Mike coin the fast food idea. Fast food of Angular. These are great. I love them.
Awesome. All right. Well, should we do some picks here before we close out the show? We'll start with our panelists, and then we'll let our guests go last.
Yeah. The other thing, I'll go. I'm just going to jump in and go. The other thing about the negative about wanting to implement all of this stuff is that it's going to take up places in my brain that I was going to reserve for watching new shows that came out, like the new season of Stranger Things kicked out, and Obi-Wan also released today. So
have you watched? You haven't watched. I haven't watched.
I did go back and rewatch the last 15 minutes of the previous season of Stranger Things, just to basically reset my brain.
That is so smart. But do they not give a recap?
I don't know. I did it myself. Just like I used to build behavior subjects in services to manage my own state. I'm not relying on the tool, but maybe sometimes it makes sense.
I don't think the last 15 minutes of a season counts as a real recap, but okay.
You want spoilers? I'll tell you what happened.
I will go watch I'll watch the 15. I'll watch it. No, my pick is a couple of things. So I'm super pumped. V14 is like right around the corner. Really excited about standalone components. There's kind of some like back and forth in the community about like if it's a good thing. I think we should have an episode where we talk about it. Just from like not only what is it, how do you use it, what are the options, but also just a general like where Angular is headed, and like do we as a community feel cozy with it? Because it's interesting to see all the opinions. Mike's like hopping. What are you saying, Mike?
I just played with those yesterday on my Twitch stream.
Oh my god! Send me the VOD. I need to say.
You know how to VOD my VOD. Go VOD my VOD.
Right. Fine, I'll find your VOD. And the other thing is we were having a side chat for those of us who are less on the NGX world and more in the .NET world about Maui. It's out. It's out of preview. It's released, and so that's really exciting. But yes, I will be streaming next week on Code It Live about Maui. And then apparently I need to get with Mike, Justin, about doing some standalone component hacking, talking, thought processing. That's all.
Nice. Well, I got one pick and one pick only, and I don't even care that Mike kind of picked it. That's the Obi-Wan series. So that's my pick. Already watched it yesterday. It came out at 9 p.m. Pacific time. So
2 episodes dropped, right?
2 episodes. Yep. So
No,
that's my
stop. We are not letting this go. Who says 2 like this? Nobody.
Well, I was going to go with.
As he's throwing the horns. Mike's a rocker at heart.
It's just 2, right?
Yeah, I know.
Anyway,
Awesome.
so
Tomas, do you have any picks?
In the spirit of the series, like I hope it's not too old, but like the 3rd season of the Love, Death plus Robots dropped sometime now. So that's pretty cool. Like some shorts, like it's pretty cool. And yeah, also like the Angular 14, and for me more like this inject function. I'm really curious, like what will be the response from like the most popular libraries, if they will figure out how to improve the developer experience even more in some like transparent ways without breaking the whole world. That would be amazing.
I want you to play with that some more, and I want you to come back and talk about that. Standalone components, that has a clear path forward for me. Inject, I understand what it's doing, but the implications and the usage of it as a trade-off for not dependency injecting things in is something that I want to definitely discuss and talk about how and why it makes sense. Not so much, hey, it's a cool tool, let's use it, but more so the why and make sure that it makes sense.
It's just the sugar, right? It's kind of, it doesn't do anything special. It's just the sugar. It's just to not write the constructor, as far as the way I understand it. But it's for a longer discussion.
Yeah, but sometimes you like to drink the coffee black and without any sugar or anything else.
Always.
I've been playing around with some stuff on that, so I'm excited about that too. We need to have some
discussion
or something.
Because I'm a little concerned now because Mike's like, yeah, use it when appropriate, and I was like, no. As soon as it drops, all the time, nothing but. And so I'm really like,
wait.
My whole life is in turmoil now.
I'm not taking you away from that. I think that as new things come out, it's very helpful to go and play with. But as part of that play and that exploration, do that evaluation. Does this make sense? Should I be using this all the time? Should I be using it some of the time? Or, you know what? This doesn't make sense for me in my application.
I think that's like built in though to just developers' personalities to have that constant, but why though? Any developer I've met, they have that in the back of their mind where they're like, but should we?
Yeah, but too many developers, in my opinion, sit there and say, it's new, I have to use it. And that's not true.
All right. Well, hey, Tomas, thanks again for coming back on the show, sharing your time, sharing your knowledge. We really, really appreciate it. This was awesome. So thank you so much.
Thank you, folks. It was amazing as always, and looking forward to the next time.
And because you're making me think about this all weekend long, I hope you spill some milk in your coffee.
Oh,
yeah, I don't know if you saw in the chat, there was a lot of love for the episode. So thank you, Thomas.
Oh, wow. Thanks. I missed that, but I will check it later. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. All right. That's a wrap. Have a good one. See everybody next time.
Ciao.